Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I got to tell you something, people. We have a really good show today. My guest, everyone knows her as ADA Casey Novak, which I want to talk about because she had another role where she was the guilty one in another episode when the whole Law and Order Special Victims Unit started. But she's also a stand-up comedian, and she has a podcast called Hear, Say with Diane Neal. And my guest is Diane Neal. How you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes.
And forgive me, I don't know if because I'm soaking wet. I just made it out of the ocean just in time. Just in time.
Where are you at? What ocean were you in? I mean, Atlantic or?
Technically not. No, it's the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not even like an ocean. It's the Gulf. But it's so I'm just on the west coast of Florida visiting my mom, and yeah, it's great.
That's good.
But I've been trying to do like a nice big ocean swim every morning, which is exhausting. You know, when you're trying to get back in shape and you're like, everything hurts. But it's a lot easier to at least swim every day.
I hurt from actually just walking over 10,000 steps at my reunion this past weekend. My wife keeps telling me, my wife goes to the gym twice a week, a trainer twice a week, and yoga once a week. She's like, you have
Good
to go.
for her.
I know. And she's like, you have to go to the gym. And I'm like, I don't want to. And I should, but oh well. Anyway, I want to talk about your podcast first. Tell me about this podcast, because I love the world of podcasting, and it's great that you started one. And tell me about it.
It's really fun. Like, everyone in the world has a podcast. You know how it is. Like you've actually been doing this longer than almost everybody else. You were like one of the early adopters, as it were. But it's funny. I did a friend's podcast called Judging Megan, which is like a friend of a friend. She's a lovely chick. And then her producer asked me, she's like, you ever thought? I'm like, yeah, I've thought about doing one, but I don't know how to do any of the technical stuff, like that kind of. I'm like, and sometimes life is just too busy to be able to pick up something else new, right? Because it's, as you know, it takes a lot more than what people think. And he was like, well, I could do this because I got this part down. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing. And so we just started doing it. And it's mostly, it's under the comedy. It's under the comedy headline. That's what we do. And it's mostly just to entertain and amuse and provide information, and like you have interesting people on and stuff that other people otherwise wouldn't know. And it's been really good fun. We're figuring it out as we go along, and so like this real legs. So some of it's a little more scattered than it could be, but we're finally getting into like a groove of what we want to do and how we want to be. And we've got theme months. So this month is like Pride, so we have some amazing guests coming on for Pride, and then I'm going to do the End of the World month. So it's going to have some of my professors from like Harvard Kennedy School that are, doomsday, some other doomsday friends of mine that are in government, we're going to have like a nice Stars and Stripes month, like all military people that we love. So it's going to be fun.
Now, do you find it easier for you to book guests because you are known? I mean, people know you have a big following on Twitter. And I think sometimes what happens is, luckily for me, booking guests, I booked a lot of good guests, and I was lucky in the beginning when I was in LA. I had a lot of character actors come in, like the Spencer Garretts and Patrick Fabians, all those guys. Right. So they all run in their packs. So they would recommend me. But for some podcasters, it's hard for them to get guests. But are you aiming for other celebrities, or are you just aiming for, like you said, college professors or just interesting people?
That's the thing. Like, it's mostly like interesting people and people that I think can help someone. Like I had my therapist on, who's like a really well-known relationship therapist, who talked about things to look out for and red flags when you're in a new relationship. Because, all these people are starting to date now once COVID's over, like anyone that was single and kind of trapped. And I've had a ton of my friends that have like regular gigs. I've had friends that are comedians. But I haven't really tried to tap into like the whole celebrity. I'll let you know how it goes. I've just asked like a few like bigwig people, and so we'll see. I'll let you know. I'll let you know, Coop. I'll let you know how it goes with booking people. So we'll see. It's hard because because there are so many podcasts out there. I mean, you have amazing guests. Like,
thank you.
Yeah, it's truly incredible. But mostly I love people that. Like, I want to have one of my neuroscience professors on from school. Like I said, I love having people that it's just something interesting. and it's not all about entertainment, and it's not just about like the business and like the fluff side of life. Because I think it's really important, especially if people are entertained, that they can get information that's really important. You know, like how much time is the breakout period for nuclear weapons development in Iran? I think that's pretty important. If you can do it. Forgive me that like I ran in so fast I forgot to turn notifications off. Forgive me.
It's all right. I have no notifications on my phone. I don't want any. I sit there. I get some words with friends notifications, and I'm like, you know what? It could keep pinging because you get these people who play like 10 games with you, and you're like, oh Christ! And I wonon't go to it for a day or two, and all of a sudden you're bing, bing, and I said, hell with it. So
you're like, yeah.
Comedy, okay? Because my background's stand-up comedy. I was a Philly.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Tell me all about you and how you got into this.
Well, no, I was a comic from '88. I was a touring comic up and down the East Coast. I was a Philly comic, and then I moved to LA, and I just started a podcast. No one was doing it. It was an internet radio show, and I just started trying to get guests. And I had an old friend, Paul F. Tompkins, was one of my first guests. Very funny comedian. And I just pulled from that. So I want to hear about you in comedy, though, because I saw on your Twitter you're doing stand-up comedy, but your background, you didn't start out as a stand-up comic. You started out as a model. Yeah,
which is ridiculous. And then, which is like, I was the nerdiest kid in the world, and it was kind of crazy that I started modeling anyway. And models are an interesting bunch. It's one of those where you'd be like, hey, where are you from? And they'd answer yes. And you're like, no, there's got to be a definitive answer to that. I'm guessing Dallas. But yeah, no, so I get really bored. So, it was really fun. Like I loved getting to go around the world and see everything, but you were usually always alone. You know what I mean? Like I'd be going to museums and seeing architecture and everything, like all the sites, but like a direct quote from this other model is like, I'm here to work. I'm not here to see things. I'm here to work. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, see stuff too. Like, it doesn't have to be binary. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So I started doing stand-up when I was a model, and it was interesting because I loved it, because it was one of those places where you can't do this anymore, but you could say anything in the world. And it's been obviously tempered over the decades. And then when I started acting, and then I was on shows, I could never book a gig. So, and I don't know if you remember this, the way pilot season used to work, that the dramas would book first and then the comedies. So I would have like a drama pilot, like in first, second, and third position, and I'd never even make it to like the comedy show auditions. So, and so then when I finished SVU, I started doing comedy again, and then like booked another gig. So then I couldn't do it anymore. And one of my buddies, I don't know if you know who Tammy Pescatelli is, really funny comic.
She did my show like 6 years ago.
Oh, you go. Okay, good. So I love Tammy. So Tammy and I were talking, and she's like, out of the blue, she asked me, hey, do you want to open for me? Like some gig that was coming up like earlier this year. I was like, I haven't done anything so long. I don't know what I'm doing. But I pulled out of my butt, just yes, I'll do it. And so then just started writing a set, and then just been doing it since. So this is just since the beginning of the year. And I forgot how much fun it is.
Oh, it really comes back to you. I had not done a show in 2.5 years, and my friend Joe Matarese was playing a show. We're both from the same hometown. So Joe said, you want to do it? And I said, yeah. And I had 20 minutes, and I did like 17 of new stuff. And I figured it's going to come back because I did it so much when I was younger. And the same thing happens to me, though. I go on, I have a great set. And I'm not one of those comics who go, I killed it, and no one laughs. I really had a good set. I got like 3 applause breaks. And I get home, and I have a glass of wine, and I'm like, yeah, I should start performing again. And wake up next morning and go, screw that. I'm not driving like 45 miles or, trying to sit around at open mic. But it was good when I got on. But since you're in New York, I mean, you must have access to a lot of stage time.
Yeah, like really luckily. And when I started reaching back out to like Stand Up New York is like my home club. And like when I reached out to Dianes at their own, everyone's been like so incredibly nice about like saying, yeah, we've got, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. It's hard because like some of my stuff is like a one joke that lasts like 30 minutes, so like I'm trying to like figure it all out again, okay, can I do shorter sets? Can I do this? Can I do that? Where can I put bits and pieces? But But yeah, it has been really fun. The thing I find the most annoying about it though is the only thing I find really annoying is what started again is everybody telling me is like, you know what would be a really funny joke?
That's the worst. You get that. That will go on forever.
And you're just like, what? Yeah, like what?
Now let me ask you something, because well, you know Tammy, you're friends with Tammy. Tammy's funny, very, very funny, very established.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've noticed, you know, and it's with actors and comics too. People who are established are very cool. They're very supportive. But for you, do you have any of the younger comics who are like, oh, she's only getting the spot because she was on TV? Because that shit always happens. And then how do you deal with that? Because it must piss you off, because it's like, no, I'm out here. I'm not on TV anymore. It helps me get in the door. But if I get in the door and I suck, they're going to say, go back to TV. So how do you handle that as a performer? How do you deal with that?
You know what? I just try and be really nice to everyone, and also like supportive, and like go see other people's shows without asking for stage time. And then if there's an opportunity, if I've been given a lot of time and I can give someone else like 5 or 10 minutes, like I do, because why not? So that's mostly how it is. But I have to say, like, the thing that's been really interesting about now that it's so much better is that in between period, like 10 years ago when I was back doing, where you go like from club to club to club to club, you do like 4 or 5, every Thursday to Sunday night, right? Like just keep going like crazy. The audience, they don't really want to be with you as much, right? Because they're like, especially as a woman, they're like, whatever, she's rich, she's famous, she's on TV, like she's pretty. We don't, wow. It's so much fun being fat, because now people are like, oh, she's fat.
Well, it's also like that.
We can enjoy her a little more as comedy.
I bet you ran into also Marilyn Rushcup had said how people would always think she was Chloe from 24, and she's like, no, I'm a comic. So people probably are thrown off going, oh, she's going to do some lawyer spiel, because unfortunately people sometimes probably do think you're a lawyer. And
no, but they do. And even like casting, like I'll never forget, like with the best was, I remember going to this audition in LA. This was like 10 years ago, and I was headlining at the Laugh Factory that night, right on Sunset. And it was so funny. They're like, I don't know if you can be funny. Like, they actually said it to my face. I'm like, how'd you get to work today? How'd you drive here? Did you go down Laurel? That's right. Did you see the marquee of the Laugh Factory? I'm like, did you see that? Stupid. But like, no, a lot of people. And then one of the craziest things is that almost inevitably someone will yell out at some point, usually right when I get on stage, rape. And I'm like, are you serious? Because, it was a show about sex crimes, right? SVU. That's what it is. And you're just like... I'm like, are you offering? You threatening? Like, I don't know what's happening.
So how did this whole career start? I mean, the modeling. How did you get in modeling? Like, were you an actor kid, or because what was your high school like? You said you were geeky earlier, but tell me about your high school.
Oh no, I'm like a science nerd. So I went to high school really young because I started school early, and then I skipped a grade. So and when I started high school, I was 4'10", so that was fun. They called me Pygmy. No, I was one of those kids that was like put in lockers, like put in garbage. Like nobody talked to me unless they wanted their homework done. Hated the theater kids. So my older sister was like one of those theater geeks. And so like people are always like walking around and singing and like, who's going to play Miss Hannigan? And everyone's freaking out about it. I'm just like, oh, I hate you all so much.
Real quick, I remember I graduated high school in 82, and our theater guys, I had nothing to do with theater. And our theater guys back then were wearing leg warmers, and no one ever saw like dudes wearing leg warmers. And I think back, and I'm like, not one of these people who actually went into acting. Now they dabble, but I'm like, I laughed because I never understood the theater people. But you're right, it's so funny. It's always like they're breaking out a musical. It's like, I have attention.
Oh my gosh, like crazy, yeah. And they would always have like cast parties at our house, and I would just like be hiding in my closet in my bedroom, just like, hey, these guys like writing treatises. On the state of the American high school educational system. Oh, so mad. But I ended up going to college like a few weeks after I was 16, and my parents sent me to be with my older sister, the one that was theatery, and because they were worried that I was so young. And she's gorgeous. She's like if Julia Roberts and Cindy Crawford had a baby. Like, we look nothing alike. It's truly shocking. And she was a model, and without telling me, she entered me into this modeling contest. And then before I knew it, and I think it's because I was especially pretty, but I was starting to get tall and very pale and very, very thin. And the next thing I knew, I was living around the world and doing that. And then New York was my home. And by the time I was like 18, 19, and it was wild. And so, like I said, though, it got, not the travel and not like the adventure and stuff, but it would get pretty boring. And then sometimes, fashion is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, especially when you're a high level fashion person and you're doing like Chanel shows and things like that. And like, an outfit you're wearing is $500,000, 250, like something that could feed an entire nation for like a year. Like it's just ludicrous. And everyone's taking it so seriously. Not that it's not that it doesn't have its place, but it's not the most important thing in the world, right? And it's not brain surgery. You're not saving lives, and there's a lot of pollution involved and stuff. And so, I found a lot of it really, as much as I appreciated it, I get really bored and really lonely. And so I started doing comedy, and then I would take off and go to school for like a semester here and there. Like, so I'd always just bail, like, and just like, I'm going to school. I'm like, I can't take it anymore. I gotta feed my brain. And one semester I was already dating and living with my husband, and I was going abroad for some biblical archaeology, and I was in Israel and Egypt. And it wasn't as fun as watching Indiana Jones, because you're not allowed to steal anything when you're really doing it. I mean, it was great. It was amazing, but it's not exactly the same. It's still amazing, not exactly the same. And when you're wearing like Muslim-friendly clothing, it gets very hot, especially when you're there in like spring semester. It's just roasting. And I got back, and Marcus, my husband, had gotten a pamphlet for Atlantic Theater Company acting school. And it was on the dining room table, and it was just down the street from our apartment in Chelsea. And the motto for Atlantic is use your will, learn to act. It wasn't like one of those things where you have to go and audition. They're just like, look, it's like any skill, you learn how to do it. And so I was like, you know what? Let me just try this. Let me just see what it's like. I'll just go. And like the first day we were doing, I don't know how many acting classes you've ever taken, but like, those repetition exercises, like you're wearing thick rimmed glasses. You're wearing thick, it's just like back and forth. It's like, people get paid for this. This is amazing. I'm like, sign me up. I'm like, this is crazy. And that was it. And I started, and man, did I hoof it, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of auditions and callbacks. And, you're just trying, and so many bad commercials. And
when did you first start booking commercials?
I started booking commercials when I was a model. So like they would have in the modeling agency usually someone from like a legitimate, from like an acting agency that would just do commercial stuff, because they always need models for commercials. The problem is a lot of the models are foreign, and so they couldn't hire them. So they need someone to speak English to go, at night, I use always because it protects better when I'm laying down. Like that kind of thing, right? Because they can't have someone that can't speak English doing this, or that is foreign, right? They can't legally hire them. So I did a zillion. I think when I started theater school, I'm not kidding. It like not hyperbole. I think I had 20 national network commercials running. Like it was nuts. And then I started doing like regular, like first, you start like on soap jobs, because nobody wanted to hire, like I couldn't get like a legitimate agent to save my life. And so the commercial agents, I can't even remember what agency that was that had that little division. J. Michael Bloom, which turned into Innovative, I think. They, so I would ask like the legitimate agents, I'm like, what can I do? And they're like, oh, you went to theater school? Great. Now do some kind of like play, right? So I got into the Women's Shakespeare Company, and I played Ophelia. None of them came to see it. And then I'm like, all right, well, what can I do? You guys come. Well, can you maybe do something else? So I wrote and directed a play like Atlantic, and nobody came to see it, right? Because you try and you're busting it. I couldn't get anyone to send me on a legitimate audition. And then finally I had my first legitimate audition, which was for the show called 100 Center Street that Sidney Lumet was doing. And I went to the audition, and it was the first, like, when you're like, I didn't even know how to audition. I was freaking out. Like, it was crazy because it was the first one I'd ever done. And they don't teach you any of that really practical stuff.
They never tell you, well, like, I had a commercial audition, and they're like, slate And I'm like, and then I go turn, and they're like, turn left and say your name. But you don't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't really take acting classes. I just had gotten lucky to get agents because I was bald and I had a lazy eye. So that helped you get a commercial agent. But I was sitting there and I had no idea what they're talking about. And they're like, okay, turn. And you're like, oh, all right. But I mean, it's, you don't, because you're right. You went to school, but they don't tell you, oh, here's an audition. You probably learn later, like, oh, here's your mark. Here's.
Oh, yeah, no. So, like, all the kids, like, on SVU, like, when we'd have all those kids that had just graduated from, like, Tisch at NYU, you know what I mean? They had no idea. I'm like, dude, this is your mark. This is what a banana is. This is what a martini is. This is the Abby Singer. Like, explaining everything. Any question you have, just ask me.
What's a banana? I know martini shot's the last shot, but what's a banana? So
a banana is like, so if you're going around a corner in a shot, right, you have to swing really wide so that the camera takes, like, because normally if you're just walking, you just go like, ee. But you got to swing really wide like that in a banana shape so that, the camera has time to, like, follow you around the corner, especially if it's like Steadicam shot and they're, the operator's going backwards. So you got a banana around, like, you got to do the long banana. And, just those little things, like, if you're doing a walk and talk, you got to talk really fast, you got to walk really slow, like way slower than normal. And but you got to talk a lot faster than normal too. And, when you're doing a 2-shot, you have to be way closer than you would normally be in real life. Like, you have to be uncomfortably close to the other person. And then that's what looks normal on screen. So, all those little things. And sometimes,
Sidney
like,
you're talking about Sidney.
Sidney Lumet. So, left that audition, and then all of a sudden, someone from, like, William Morris called my house, someone from Endeavor, someone, like, I didn't get the job, but Sidney Lumet had called everyone he knew in the business and told them to take me as a client. It was the greatest thing it was the greatest gift. Like, I'll always be grateful to my sister for entering me in that random modeling contest, because it got to see planet Earth and do, like, the craziest stuff and the most fun stuff all around the world. And then Sidney Lumet making that, these phone calls changed everything. And so I started meeting with all these different agents and managers. And I didn't even know how to pick, because I didn't know anybody in the business. Like, anybody. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. Like, so there's no way to, like, how do you pick, like, and so I picked my agent because he was at Gersh, because he was a hilarious, dorky guy who wore a cape. And I was like, seems right. I loved Stephen Hirsch, where he's not my agent anymore, but, like, man, I loved him. And then, I picked my manager, who I was just texting with this morning. He hasn't been my manager in like 10 years. He left the business, but I picked them because I liked their carpet. They had cheetah print carpet. Seriously, I had like no other way to pick. And then I just started auditioning. And, the next thing you know, you do a bunch of pilots, none of them go. Yeah, it's a slog. I don't think people even realize, like the year that I booked SVU, I remember going back to because this was, my appointment book, where you write an appointment book. And I started working on SVU, I think, in maybe July of that year. By the time I booked SVU, I'd already been over 500 auditions and callbacks and stuff, and I'd shot 3 pilots. Like, it was. But
I got to tell you this, and that's the same. A lot of actors have the same story where they pilots after pilots after pilots. I mean, Steven Weber's done tons of pilots, and
I love Steven Weber.
He's done tons of. He's a great guest. You should get him on your show. He's an amazing guest. He's so entertaining. But I always said that actors, though, like, you said, I got 3 pilots after 5, but that's so much more than anybody else gets. Like, you got a pilot, and I know actors, it's hard because you get excited. Like, if this pilot gets picked up, my life's going to change. But I always laugh, like you and other actors are like bummed that you booked 3 pilots, but for other people, be like, holy crap, she booked 3 pilots. I didn't even get a guest star or a recurring.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Well, and it's all like the content. Like right now, I'd kill for 1 pilot. You know what I mean? Like it's everything shifts, and it was wild because at the time I didn't know. I just thought that's how it was, and that's what it was for everybody else. I was like, oh, okay. And I remember the first pilot that I did, which was like really badly timed. Sorry. It was called The American Embassy, and we filmed in London, which was so much fun. And the pilot episode ended with a terrorist. By the way, this is in the year 2000, a terrorist bombing of the embassy, but the pilot wasn't coming out until like 2001. Like it was, it was held over, and it was just like, oh, that's after 9/11. Like that's not going anywhere. But they actually fired me. They picked up the show and they fired me, and replaced me with I can't even remember her name. Great actress, but Asian American woman, amazing. But I was like, I thought not getting picked up with the show was like the end of my career. I remember talking to my agent. I'm like, "Is this when you drop me, man? Is this how it ends?" Like, and he's like, "No. Like, you also did 3 other pilots. Like calm down." I was like, "Oh my god, it's the end. It's never happening."
Of the 3 other pilots you shot, did you think that anyone would get picked up? Because once again, I've talked to people who go, "Well, these people are involved, and these people are involved." There's like no way this is not getting picked up. Were any of them that you shot that you said, "Okay, this is really, really good, and this is going to get picked up"?
No, like because I had so little exposure, because I was always in New York too, so I had like so little exposure to like the LA side of the business where like all the decisions are made and things like that. Like I didn't know what the hell anyone at any network is looking for. Like I didn't know any of that stuff. Like I was like and by like my 3rd or 4th pilot season, like 2003 when I started the year I started SVU. My pilot and first position was amazing. It was one of those that I was like, this is so going to go while we're filming it. It was Javier Grillo Marswatch, like one of the greatest like show runners and producers of all time, who based it. We had like Joel Silver was one of the producers, who was super hot at the time. We filmed it was based on a Philip K. Dick. Like it was the coolest. We shot at Fox Australia. We got to use everything. It was before the 3rd Matrix movie had come out. So we got to use, so the people that did my outfits did the Matrix. It was like futuristic. It was so cool. Russell Crowe's best friend was my leading man. Like it was crazy. I was like, of course this is going to get picked up. And then I remember when we got a copy of the pilot, my manager and I sat down and we watched it and we were like, oh yeah, that's not going anywhere at all. Because it was such counter programming. There was nothing. There was no Lost on TV. There was nothing like sci-fi. There was nothing futuristic. There was nothing far out. We're like, yeah, that's not getting picked up, and it didn't. It totally didn't. But it was for NBC, and so then when Stephanie March decided to leave SVU, they were like, hey, do you want to come and audition? And I was like, I never watched procedurals. I didn't know anything about it. When I first saw the script, I thought her name was ADA Novak. I didn't realize it was ADA, even though my dad was a federal attorney. I was like, what? I remember my dad going like, no, it's ADA. That's assistant. I was like, oh, right. Okay, that makes way more sense. I was like, idiot. Because they never said her first name. They just wrote Ada Novak. Right? I was like, okay. I was like, all right. And I'm like 24. So I'm like, oh, sure, that sounds good. And I remember going in for the audition, which was easily one of those where I was like, okay, that when you leave and you're like, I'm just going to quit the business. Like, that was the worst. Like, I stunk. Like, did I leave fumes behind me of stinkitude? Like, it was so grotesque. And you just leave with such self-loathing and hatred. And I remember, like, walking back home, like, forever through the city. And, like, I took my heels off and I was just walking barefoot and just, like, that soft sobbing where you're like, and I didn't hear anything for weeks. And you know how it is. Like, if you don't hear anything, like, you didn't get the job, right? Like, that's it. People outside the business always ask, like, how did it go? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, even to this day, I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea how it went. Because every time I think I get it and I nailed it, I don't get the job. And anytime I think it's the worst thing that's ever happened, I get the job. I don't know. And I got a call a few weeks later asking if I wanted the job. And it was a huge pay cut from what I was getting for pilots and stuff like that. Like a massive pay cut, but it was on the air. It was in my hometown in the city. So I wouldn't have to go to LA or anything. And I never really enjoyed LA, like, at all. Just not a good fit for me. And And I was so excited. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And it was one of those things that my contract was like a 7-episode contract with a 7-year edition, right? Like it was like, and so when I started and we were doing like all the cast photos and stuff before the season began, like they'd be like, okay, Diane, now step out, like just in case it didn't work out, like they'd get the cast without me. So, you know, and everyone was, you know, Mariska was like the next youngest person on set, and she's 15 years older than I am. So, you know, she was like 40 and I'm like 24, 25 and with a lot of energy. And I was like super excited and I'm sure incredibly annoying. Incredibly annoying.
So you get the role, and then what happens? I mean, you're only for 7 episodes, but how does it start working out?
So it starts.
Weren't you in an episode though where you played someone guilty?
Yeah. So one of my first guest starring parts, a couple of years earlier, I got hired at like 22 to play like a finance chief who was into autoerotic asphyxiation. And so like that, I was like, that was the first job where I'm like, what are marks? What's happening? Like luckily, like one of the other lady rapists was a great actress named Paige Turco, who kind of walked me through everything so I wouldn't be just like a total disaster. But I'll never forget like that guest starring in that episode, my first scene that was being filmed, and the director of that amazing dude named Constantine Macros, who we're still buddies. He was, I had to like, I don't know why they booked this at like rush hour, like this scene. It was on like 57th and 5th, which is a very busy part of the city. If you guys don't know anything about Manhattan, it's like a crazy busy part of the city, especially at like rush hour. And I was supposed to walk out of this building like a good 30, 40 feet and meet like Munch and Finn. So like Ice-T and Richard Belzer. And you're so nervous, right? Because it's the first time I've ever done anything, really. And I'm like, but every time I'd get out the door and I'd almost get to them, somebody would go, yo, Ice! And they're like, cut. So we're on take like 30 before I even get a word out. So I'm just getting progressively more nervous. And I'm like, and then I'll never forget after the first take where we actually got to say words, Gus pulling me aside. He's like, do you think you could act like human? And I was like, yes. I'm sorry. I'm really nervous right now. And it's just getting worse as I haven't been able, like, it's 100 times out the door. I'm freaking out. So, and I always like, the great part is like, I always remembered that too. Like whenever I've been lucky enough to like star and stuff and be anyone that had like one line, I'm like, I'm here for you. I know it's terrible because you've been sitting around all damn day waiting to do this one friggin' line. I know which makes it just so much worse than if you're talking all day in every scene. I'm like, you need anything? I'm like, I'm getting paid no matter what. It takes us 1 take. It takes us 100 takes. I don't care. Like, just so you know, like just to, to kind of ease that, because I remember that feeling so intensely. But almost every other character in like the Law and Order universe, like Kelly Geddish played like some sort of criminal victim a few years before she was hired as a cop. Patha from the Mothership she played like the mother of a victim in the Law and Order movie. Like, everybody had played something somewhere else.
It's crazy because, you talk to a lot of actors who have had like through the years have like 3 different roles on different Law and Orders, but they don't do that anymore. You don't see people. It's like something, and it's so funny because it's like nothing has really changed. I mean, in fact, those shows were getting more viewers then because there wasn't so much on cable.
Right.
So people, and there's only like geeks like me that I can remember the whole cast of Barney Miller. I mean, that's just me. I'm odd like that. But people don't really recognize. I mean, I recognize it because my wife's an assault survivor. She's an advocate, but she's always watched that show. And then we were watching one time. We're like, because it's some reruns, you can watch it. Like, I used to fly to visit her from L.A., and I swear to God, I would take the Virgin used to fly from L.A. to Philly.
Yes.
I would take the red eye, and I would get on it, and as I'm flying, I'd fall asleep, and like Law and Order Criminal Intent would be on, and then I'd wake up at like 3 a.m, and Law and Order SVU would be on. So it was on all the time. So you're going to see people, but it's funny that people don't really care. Like I know because I follow TV, but I remember seeing you, and I'm like, wait a second. I said, That's Novak.
Rapist?
I said, she really turned her life around. Jail does rehabilitation. But so
good for you, kid.
So when you did it, so when you start the first season as ADA,
yeah,
and now, were you nervous at all? Because it was a few seasons in, so I've always heard that show's been a very well-oiled machine. So what was it like?
Yeah, I was nervous, and like I thought things. Like, I thought everyone would hang out together and be buddies, and we're all in this together. Like, let's jump in the fray, and now, they're way older. They've got kids and lives, things like that. And I'm like, hey, what are we doing tonight, guys? Just like full of beans, full of energy. So almost, I was the same age as like most of the PAs. So like, we're all still friends because we're all still really good friends. But it was the most fun. It was the most fun. And once you get over like the intimidation and everything like that, it's the most fun that you could have. And it was also the greatest lesson that don't take any of it too seriously. Because, we would have these amazing guest actors who had won like Emmys, Oscar, Tonys, things like that, 10 years before, who were excited about playing a rapist for top of show, which for people listening, that means it's kind of like top of show. It's like the union minimum for like a guest star, so like, a few $1,000 kind of thing, whatever it was back in the day. Not what they were getting when they were, the star on like a huge sitcom or something like that. And it was great. And they were all so fascinating and so wise and had so much advice. And it really taught me how to just be, it's just a job. Like I'm so grateful for that, because I've seen it, you've probably seen it too. Like I always call it people that get excited about themselves, they start taking it a little too, they think it has something to do with their self-worth or their value as a human being, just because they can be picked out of a lineup, they're recognizable in some sort of way. And it was such a great lesson, and getting to learn from all these people. Like it was nuts. Like I've gotten to work with everyone from like Alfred Molina to Robin Williams and Beverly D'Angelo to Angela Lansbury,
What was that like? I heard, because I always heard she was, back when Murder, She Wrote was on, she always made sure that the guest stars got a shitload of money. Like she loved actors. They always said, she worked in a contract where a guest star would get a fair amount, because I know people who had like their first role in that show. What was it like with you working with her?
She was incredible. She had a broken wrist at the time, and she was already like in her 80s, and she was on point. She knew her lines, she knew her marks, she knew everything. She was, talk about well-oiled machine. She was such a pro. It was astounding to watch. And that was like the great thing too, because we got a lot of the theater actors, in New York as well too. These people who, it's like a team effort, it's not like I'm so special and this and that. And you'd really notice the difference between like guest stars they'd fly in from LA and like, some of these great New York actors who were theater people, like Ned Eisenberg, who died recently, which is such a bummer. Like he was spectacular. And you'd always get to like, and because I didn't come from the world of like knowing who any of these people were, it was great. Like I could talk to them and find out everything about them. Like, like Ned Eisenberg taught me how to do soft shoe, which was incredibly fun. Betty Buckley, who I still absolutely adore and keep in contact with, because I was not into, I'm like, you were in musical theater? She's like one of the most famous like musical theater actresses like of all time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, can you teach me how to sing? Like it was amazing. And we shot, so all the years I was on, we shot in the swamplands of New Jersey on the other side of the Lincoln Tunnel, in an old, I think it was a dog food factory that they kind of converted, because there were all these, like, it was, so you weren't, and there were no other shows really in New York at the time. There was like SNL, and that was, and the Law and Orders, and that was kind of it. So you're so outside of that industry, or like where you're celebrated, or you think you're fancy, because you're not at like a big studio, walking around. You're not a set. You don't meet any of the executives. People aren't blowing sunshine up your butt. You're in a stink factory, in a Jersey swamp. And it was it was like the greatest. And I loved all the guest stars. And our set could be very, very tough at times. I know, especially for guest stars. And I set up a little, I don't drink, but I set up a little bar in my like for every like talk show I did, you know, they give you the gift baskets full of like different liquors. So I could set up a bar. And if I ever heard like a guest star crying, I'd be like, I'd always tell like the PAs the second I'd like, put him next to me, you know? And if I heard him crying, I'd just knock on the door. I'm like, hey, it's okay. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard for me to come on over. You know, do you want to run lines? You know, is there anything I can do to make it easier for you? And it was just, yeah. But there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't understand because sometimes I still don't understand it. You know how like people would bitch about like the days about how long they were, right? So one day I calculated how much time we were waiting for people to come out of their dressing rooms. I thought I was being helpful. And I was like, hey guys, it took everyone, you know, like got the cast together, right? Like everyone's like, again, in their 40s to 60s. And I'm like this 25-year-old, like I was like, we wasted 3 hours and 46 minutes, you know, yesterday, just waiting for people to come in the dressing rooms. If you're really worried about getting home on time, and everyone's like, screw you, kid. You know, I was like, I was like, I thought I was being helpful. You know, like I didn't know.
What was Christopher Maloney like? Because he's so intense, but then I see him on Harold and Kumar's one movie, like totally made up. What was he like? Because he seems like he's funny, because someone who gets that so intense has to do something to blow off their smoke. He used to terrify me. It was so intense when I started. And he does have that capacity to be hilarious, right? And I'm an idiot and a bit of a jokester. So like the whole first 6 months, I was at SVU. I don't know if you ever saw Wet Hot American Summer. Great film. And Maloney plays this Vietnam vet who's the camp chef, and his best friend is an open can of mixed vegetables that talks to him. So every day I'd come to set, I'd bring a new can of mixed vegetables, I'd open it, and I'd leave it somewhere, like in the squad room, you know, wherever they were like. And after like 6 months, he's like, who keeps doing like the band? I mean, like livid, right? Livid. and I'm like, I do? And he's like, why? It's like, Wet Hot American Summer, dude? And he's like, how old are you? I was like, I've been there working with them 18 hours a day for 6 months at this point, right? Like, I'm like, Chris, I think I just turned 25. I'm like, I'm 25. He's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And like, and then once he realized, like, he was so funny. So I'd make him do like Freak Show, that character from Harold and Kumar. I'm like, Randy, what? Get some methods everywhere. You know, he'd start like playing with me, and you know, it just. But I remember it took he was so intense. You know, we'd be if it was a scene with like the two of us. And I'd just be waiting for the scene to start. And, you know, he'd be like, don't look at me. And I'm like, what? You know, like, oh my God, it was so scary. It was so scary. But, you know, part of that was just me not realizing that, everyone's got their process. And that took me a while too to figure out, because, you know, I could just be dorking around and messing around, and someone would say action, and I'd be like, where were you Tuesday? You know, like, not a problem. And it took me a while to realize, okay, not everybody's like that. Everyone has to like work into it in their own way. And so you start getting really familiar with people's different like warm up methods and what they need to be in the scene. Sometimes they just need absolute silence, or they need to be alone. They need to listen to music, you know, whatever it is. And you just stay out of their way or help if you can. But yeah, it was, Maloney he was wild back then. He was so intense. He was so funny, but so intense. And then he would have these amazing parties. And then Marcus and I would always be the last like idiots to leave, like always. Like I remember he and Sherman like we've been kicked out of Maloney's house like so many times. So we just never leave. It was wild. And it was kind of, you know, it's fun to be there for all these people's like life moments, you know, like when Mariska started dating Peter, her husband, you know, when she started having kids, when Chris started having kids, you know,
Belzer's daughters, getting married. And yeah, it's really fun to start being a part of everybody's life and seeing where things could go and learning not to take stuff seriously. It was just really fun. And Ice, of course, was like the funniest. He just cracked me up endlessly. And he's always full of like the greatest advice, always.
Now, what was it like for you? Because you're all of a sudden, people are recognizing you. It's, as I said, that show is very watched. So, people may have known you as a model, but your life must have been changing because people, would know you as a lawyer. And I don't know what was the reaction to you when you would go in public? Because, it's New York City. I know everyone's not really always looking up, but what was it like for you?
It was the weirdest. It was for the first year, I kept thinking I had spinach in my teeth, or I tucked my skirt into my underpants. You don't understand what because everyone starts looking at you. Everyone's just staring at you all the time, and in a very strange it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're is something wrong? Do I have a booger? What's going on? It's such a weird, especially because when you're normal and you're from a normal background and normal people things. And even when I was a model, no one recognized me. I always say, and I was always you have so much makeup on and, no one really recognizes you. And nobody really follows models. It was the era of the Super Bowl, but nobody really cares. And so it was by second season, then it was everywhere you went, you could go nowhere. And there's a really big difference too I've noticed between my friends that are movie stars, especially back then, and then people that are on TV. Because the movie stars, they were almost kind of removed. They're up on the silver screen and they're inaccessible and they're different. But when you're in someone's living room or bedroom, in their house 24 hours a day, they think they know you. And because, in some sense they do, you're one of their friends. They see you 24/7. And it's, man, it was wild. I have to admit, I loved it because I love people, but none of my girlfriends, no one wanted to go to the mall with me. They're Diana, just I need to have a short trip to the mall. Can you not come? And I'm oh man, really? And they're yeah, I just have to pick up a pair of black pants. You can't come. It'll take hours, because everybody comes up to you and you have to get used to the weird parts of when people would talk to you. You could be at a funeral, and everyone's they're so excited. You just it got very strange, but it was also really, really nice. It was everyone was a friend, and then you could bring so much sunshine to people's lives. It was crazy, And then the weird thing with me is people always recognize my voice. So if I was in a drive-through, ordering Mickey D's, whatever I was doing, they're oh my God, Novak! I was yeah, hi. They're what are you doing here? I'm I'm getting a 2 cheeseburger meal. I love it. I love it. But so it was a wild thing, and it's been really interesting. So and then you go from being, after spending, because then, I was on NCIS, which had even more people watching it, globally, which was nuts. So, 2 of the most popular shows, globally of all time, people watching in every country. So, insane stuff would happen. I'd be on a remote beach in Aruba where I've just driven a Jeep down a cliff, with my screaming friends in back, to an isolated beach. I'm not kidding. This actually happened. There's a dude selling waters and drinks out of a cooler, and we were how did he get here, right? We had to come over a mountain, how did he even get here? And he's oh my God, Novak, you have to come home with me. And I'm where's your home? He's 7 miles past the ostrich farm. I was what? I was I'm gonna hang out on the beach, but we'll get some waters, dude. But it was it didn't matter anywhere you went in the world, people would follow you into the bathroom. It was just wild. And then And then I had some stuff going on where I vanished for not reasons of my own, and then COVID hit, and then I got really sick, and I put on weight, and all of a sudden, after 20 years, it vanished. No one recognized me, and there was this kind of amazing freedom in it. And then also it's a little bit of oh, I miss brightening up people's days. because you could like, and I always thought about that. Like if you just spend 5 minutes with like some of these kids and you ask them about their life and like what they're doing, like I thought like, wow, if like I know I'm an idiot and a moron and not that special, but man, when I was young, if someone that I'd admired, for whatever reason, even if it's just, imaginary admire because they're on TV, had asked me questions about my life and what I was doing and my goals and dreams, like what a difference that would have made. So I miss doing that kind of stuff. But then there's this kind of beauty and anonymity. Like today it was like amazing. Like I went to the beach and I was just like, gut out in my swim. Like, no, nobody recognized. It was like amazing. Like you don't have to worry about it anymore because there's always that thing of someone, because people also, there's something people really love to do, which is they make themselves feel better by putting down someone they think is famous, right? Or fancy, or they love it. Like, so you get shit on constantly as well. And a lot of that is just people trying to feel good about themselves, and so that part's gone too. So that's nice.
Now, how did lawyers react to you? Because I talked to Delaney Williams. She was on SVU as a after, but then he played a cop in The Wire, and he said the cops really liked him when they saw him. They're like, "Hey, it's a good, you did a good representation." Did lawyers like ever come up to you and try to give you hints at if you're out, like, oh yeah, you should do this, or I wonder how they would deal with it, because sometimes how some lawyers are just so full of themselves. They wanted to be actors.
Yeah.
They're theatrical in the club. How would real life lawyers act to you?
Well, the main lawyer in my life, my dad, who passed away recently, he was hilarious. So Dad was a federal attorney his entire career, and he's from Mississippi, and he went to Ole Miss. And like the show, when I first started, I think it aired on like Tuesdays. Wednesday morning, I would always get a call from my dad going, "Sweetheart, that's not how it works. That's illegal." I'm like, "Dad, I still don't write the show." Like, he drove him insane. I was like, "I don't write the show, Dad." And he's like, "You should have done X, Y." I'm like, I thank you, Dad. But I still, once again, I don't write. He's like, "Can you see?" I'm like, "No, they don't care." And like, that's the one thing people don't realize too, that all the dialogue, especially on network shows, every word of it has gone through the legal department of the network. And then especially when you're playing a lawyer, you cannot even add like an S to the end of a word. You must recite that text verbatim. There's no ad-libbing. There's no improv. There's no anything. So every word you've ever seen me say is exactly how it was written. And but yeah, other lawyers kind of loved it. It's really funny. Pictures of me are used to advertise law firms all over the world, which I think is hilarious. People always send them to me. It's very funny. Everyone. So I have tons of friends that are lawyers, and because they were all like in law school when I was starting at SVU, right? Because that's about the age, And it was so funny. I helped so many of my friends study for the bar. I never would have passed it because I would never get any question right. And most of them are like HR lawyers, corporate lawyers, M&A, that kind of thing. So everyone would call me for like a good 15 years. If anyone had a criminal law question, they would call me. So even, this was one of the funniest things that ever happened. My stand-in on NCIS, her husband was the head of one of the biggest extras casting places in LA. And they'd been visiting New York, had dinner with him and all kinds of nice stuff. And I knew they were leaving in a couple days. And when they were leaving, I get this call at 2 a.m. She's like, "Oh my gosh," I won't say his name. She's like, "He's been arrested at the airport. What's going to happen?" And I was like, "What? What's happening?" I'm like, okay. He packed a taser in his bag to come to New York from LA. Like, it's that different in danger, but whatever. And she was asking me, and I was like, okay, this is what's going to happen. He's going to be taken to an arraignment court here. He's going to be taken so it was funny that I could answer, all that stuff. And so even my lawyer friends would call and ask me if they had a criminal law question, which I always thought, like, this is shady. You guys should have better resources than me.
Now, why did you leave SVU? Was it a mutual thing? Did you get written out, or what happened? Because I know
I did not know I was going to be let go. I found out by reading the tabloids in the makeup chair one day that I was leaving to go do comedy, which was a shock to me. So I would have stayed forever. And I was not happy about that. And it was done really poorly and really unkindly. And yeah, I will leave the reasons up to your imagination. But you know how it is. It's like, yeah, they just, the, you know, yeah. So it wasn't my choice.
So
It wasn't my choice.
no. So where do you go mentally during that? Because as you said, it's a great time, and it's one of those things when you get blindsided, and that happens a lot. People go,
Yeah.
I know people who've gotten fired at table reads. Like, what the
Yeah.
hell? You know,
Yeah.
Kathleen Rose Perkins in Rules of Engagement got
Right.
fired at the table read, and you're like, what? You know,
Right. And I still had to go to work for like months.
and people
like
loved your
knowing-
character too. That's the thing. Also, it wasn't like people like, oh yeah, she's a dick. You know, like they liked
Yeah,
you.
and I wasn't allowed to say anything about it publicly, like, which was the worst. So like the worst is like once it was, and so I had to go to work every day, and someone there had a very big hand in it, and had to work with this person every day who would tell me things like, it's going to be great for you. And I'm like, really? Getting fired is great for like losing my income? I'm like, yeah, thanks, dickwad. But you got to suck it up. And then, once I was gone, like because, you're recognized everywhere you go. Everyone was like, why would you leave? That's so stupid. And I can't say about it, like, it wasn't my fucking choice. Like, you just want to tell people, like, of course I'm not an idiot. Of course I wouldn't have left. It had nothing to do with me. And you can't say any of it. And it's so frustrating. And the crew, I loved the crew so much. And they were really not happy. They were really not happy about it. And so they were hilarious. Every day they would check in, someone from the crew like call me and be like, when the season started again without me, they're like, we love you. We miss you so much. And, someone was like, this so-and-so was trying to sit in your chair. One of the teams is like, I'm bringing the chair to your house. No one's putting their pear mark on your chair. I'm like, thanks, man. It was, the one nice thing, it's like I got to pick a lot of the people who were in my last episode. So my favorite person to go up against as a defense attorney was Viola Davis. So they brought, and this is not when she, no one knew who Viola Davis was. And Viola was my favorite. So they brought Viola back. They brought, it was great. My favorite judge, my favorite director, that was fun. I got to say goodbye to a lot of the people I loved, but it even makes me like verklempt now thinking about it. Yeah, I never would have left. Like, I loved it. I loved my job. And then like my second season, they built that courtroom for me. They never had a courtroom set before I was there. And then after my first season, they're like, oh, she can actually say the words and we can actually do a lot of courtroom. So like, let's build a courtroom for her. And they bought me the night court set. Isn't that awesome?
That's awesome.
And it was just like, we called it like, so everyone, especially that was like my age, we called it the room of requirement, which is like a Harry Potter thing, which is, it's everything you need it to be. And because, a lot of the more intense people wouldn't be there when we were shooting courtroom, it was always like, when it was my set, it was always like, this is a place where everybody's loved. This is supposed to be fun. We're not curing cancer. You know what I mean? If we got pissy, I bring my light. I had these like custom lightsabers because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And like, we keep them on set. So if there was ever like conflict, we're like between like departments or something, we turn all the lights off on set for like 5 minutes and just have a lightsaber fight between departments, it was so much fun. Like it was like the most fun that you can have, it was, as a human being, it was like where everything is about as good as it gets. So yeah, I didn't want it to end at all. And then it was really hard too, because, people ask you questions about like, oh, do you like the new TA? And then like even actors who were auditioning for my part, would call me because they didn't know that I didn't choose to leave. So I'm like having to give advice to the, to people who are taking, might take my job. It was awful. It was awful. It was truly like one of the most depressing periods of my life.
So how'd you rebound? It's got to be depressing. I know luckily you had a long run, so financially you're okay.
Yeah.
did you? I mean, and then you rebounded, you know, and you were also on The Following, which I love that show, and
That was fun.
NCIS. But what was it like for you? I mean, did you just sit there and say, "I'm getting back on the horse," or did you take some time off?
You know, I took. I started going. That's when I actually started going to Harvard, which was crazy. Because I was like, you know what? Let me finish my degree and let my brain fill up a little bit more, because it gets a little frustrating. And then, you know, I had to spend a lot more time. I had actually, until NCIS, I'd never worked a day in LA, ever. That was like the first set I'd ever been on in LA was NCIS. And that shoots in Santa Clarita, like way north. Right. It's like it's not even like I think it was like
I was a hand model in NCIS.
No way, that's awesome.
They go up and they had an apple. I sat and then the second unit, and I sat on an apple box, and I did the take. One finger and two fingers pushing a button on the bottom, and I had no idea why they used me, but it gave me a voucher, awesome. And I was just like cracking up. And when it came on, I posted it on Facebook. I'm like, "Hey guys, my hand was on the #1 show in the world."
Do you know what the hilarious thing is? It's like when I started at SVU, you know how like you get handed the pictures of dead bodies right for the over the shoulder shot. Listen, I couldn't understand why, like, none of the other actors, like, you know, you hand them the picture, this and that. Nobody would take it because no one wanted to stay around for the insert shots. If you watch those early episodes, I'm trying to hand folders to people, hand pictures, and nobody would say, they just walk away. That's because nobody wanted to stay. It was like the funny things you learn, you know, like, oh my gosh. It used to crack me up. Well, like, it took a while to, like, and then like guest starring on a lot of other shows and seeing, because, you know, my only real experience was years in this Jersey swamp and the dynamics that were there. And it has, you know, obviously incredibly serious subject matter and stuff. And so everyone can be very, very intense, which is not usually my thing. So it was really fun to start to branch out. So, like, being out those years on SVU was like baptism by fire, and everything since then has been easier. Like, everything since then has been easier. And it was funny. So, like, NCIS ended up being one of those places. It was such a different thing. Mark Harmon was one of the nicest, friendliest. He was like a man after my own heart. Like, he ate with the crew every day. You know, his trailer was always like, the door was open and he sat outside in case anyone wanted to talk to him about anything.
He had his dog.
Got that dog, right? It's got, you know, it was, I could take my dogs were banned on set of SVU by another actor. By the way, dogs like this big. And by another actor. By the way, not because they did anything wrong, just this person didn't like dogs. And so it was so much fun. You know, I could take my dogs to set. And it went from doing like 10 pages of very steady dialogue, legal dialogue where you can't change a word, to, you know, I played the female Mark Harmon, which is way less words, almost none. And, you know, just a lot of squinting. And almost everyone was my age. So, like, Brian Dietzen, Sean Murray, Cody DePablo, and I are all born the same week. And so, you know, like, it was such a different vibe being around like people your own age, and so funny. And like Polly Perrette and I are still really good buddies, you know, and Cody became one of my best friends. And, you know, like, it was, and the difference in the days, because it's a different style of shooting and stuff too, right? So, you know, we would, SVU, you know, the longest day I ever filmed on SVU was 22 hours. I think the longest day I ever filmed on NCIS was 13, maybe tops. And that was a weird day. That was like, we went over, oh my gosh, everyone's freaking out. And you could have a life, you know, when you were doing these other shows. It was crazy. And it was so much more lighthearted, especially too, because it's not like, and like, I know better, like, I'm not stupid. Like, NCIS is not high art. You know, it's not like, you got to know what it is too, and not be like afraid of it. And that's the thing. Like, I was never looking for high art. I was just looking, I loved working and I loved having fun and being with people. And all the NCISs really was like, it was crazy fun. You get to chase bad guys and kick doors, and I'm strapped with guns. You know what I mean? Like, which is every liberal's fantasy, because they're fun to play with. You know, like they're really fun to play with. So, and then yeah, getting to do like getting to work with like Kevin Bacon, that was amazing. Like on The Following, he was like another guy after my own, like totally normal and like nice, and like knew none of it was real, and didn't feel like superior to other people. Because previously I'd worked with a lot of people who felt like generally like I'm, you know, like, hi, I'm a star, you know, and don't look in my eyes, and, you know, don't come anywhere near me, and, you know, like that kind of thing. And then being with like people who are really famous, you know, and they're totally cool, you know, and totally normal. And we'd have days like, I remember just one day on The Following, like, and if anyone hasn't watched it, so I play an FBI agent, but I'm secretly an actual serial killer. And so Kevin Bacon's like my partner, but I get shot in the chest, and he's like stopping the bleeding, and, you know, and so we take a break, and it was hilarious because like I'm just laying on a floor, and he's sitting on the floor next to me, and people bring us food, and I'm like, this is the greatest job but he's like, isn't it though? I'm like, we're just sitting on a floor and laying on a floor, and people bring us food. Like, it doesn't get any better. So I never understood, like, you know, when you meet cranky actors, you know, people that are just perpetually jerky on sets and stuff, like, and I never understood it. Because, you know, everyone has bad days, right? That's fine. Like, I've had a bad day, you know, on sets, because usually something else is going on in life, whatever, right? But overall, it is the most fun job in the universe. You're playing dress up. People are paying you insane amounts of money to play dress up. Have fun. Hang out with, like, and people do everything for you, you know, like you could say, like, you know, I really feel like some Red Lobster. They're like, okay, we'll send a PA out. What would you like? You know, like, it's amazing. It's like, it's as good as life gets. And the stakes in reality are so low. You know, you aren't fighting a war, you know, as Michael Weatherly, who's like one of my favorite human beings alive. He's like, we're not really kissing the girl. We're not really solving the crime. We're not really chasing the bad guy. He's like, the stakes are very, very low. I'm like, it's true. It's true. And it's there's never, like, I get so excited on, this is my problem, is like, I have trouble, especially some days, like on NCIS New Orleans and stuff, they'll be like, hey, Diane, you're going to jump out of this chopper, you're going to land on this boat, then you're going to jump to the other boat, and then you're going to run after this guy, and then you're going to hit that guy with a pistol. And I'm just like, can I smile the whole time? Because I don't know if I can wipe it off my face. This is too good. Like, it's too good. And then my stunt people would always be really mad, because I'm like, no, your job is to play with my dog. Like, my job is to go have fun. Like, these are the moments I live for. We're blowing something up. Let's go. It was great.
Now, what's the future hold for you? Are you going to start acting again? Are you going to concentrate on comedy, the podcast? Because you're doing a lot of stuff, and as you know, comedy does take a lot of time, because you do really have to do the grind. I mean, when I started out, I would be in Philly a few nights. I mean, there was a lot of clubs, and then when I got on the road, you know, I mean, I remember driving back from a shit gig on the border of Iowa and Ohio, or somewhere weird, or Indiana and Ohio, and driving. But then when I drove like 9 hours, and I would still go to the open mic when I got back, because we were just like, I was also 23 or 24, so it's in your mind frame.
Oh my God, when we had so much energy.
Yeah, a lot of people don't get that, you know. There is really, I mean, that's why, you know, you see guys like, you know, Keith Robinson's an old friend. He's still hitting all the shows, and these people, all the New York guys are constantly hitting, you know, 2-3 shows. What are you going to concentrate on now?
Well, you know, I don't, like, no one is hiring me for acting, so it's not like it's not for lack of trying. Just you know, I guess every actor has those periods where, like, they're just we're not into her. So mostly just sticking with the comedy for now, because it's really fun and it makes me laugh, and I love watching other comics, and even though it's really tough, and it's a grind a lot of the time. That's a good way to put it. At least it's a community, you know what I mean? And you feel like you're doing something, and it can help you hone a bunch of skills that you may not have had. So that's so mostly I'm focusing on the comedy, but that's just because that's the way things shake out. And the funny thing is, like, I don't mind being honest about this stuff too. You know, like I've never understood those people who want to like pretend everything's amazing. Like, I have so many things ahead, you know, like this is so great. I'm doing this and I'm doing that, because everyone should know that, you know, life doesn't work that way and the business doesn't work that way. And that even when you've had moments of like insane success, you can still be totally unhireable for a while, right? Like, you know, like, and you have so little control over it. It's not something that, you know, you can't hire yourself. You can try and make your own work and do things. So like I filmed like a comedy special, you know what I mean? Which is great. But, you know, my partner and I had to like self-fund it and do this out. We're, you know, putting it up on Amazon Prime, and you can make your own work, but that's, you know, that's hard too. And it's not like, so you just kind of have to ride these waves and not take these too personally too. Like, you can't take like all the fame and stuff personally, and you can't take any of this personally either.
Well, there you go. See, that's a great way to end the interview. You were very honest. I always like someone to enter, because, you know, years ago, I loved Letterman, and he'd always say, all you need is 3 good stories. And that's why I love with guests that do a lot of things, because I always say, as an interviewer, people don't listen to me, they listen to the guests. So you have the perfect ending. And now tell everyone, where can we find your special?
You can find my special. You can go to DianeNeal.com. You can find it. If you go on my link tree, on my Twitter, my Instagram, and my bio, it's there. And in a week or two, it should be up on Amazon Prime, which would be really fun.
Cool. Well, people go check her out. And she tweets a lot. Diane Neal. It's Diane Neal, at Diane Neal on Twitter. Go to my Twitter. It's at Cooper Talk. You can also follow me on Instagram, Cooper Talk 1. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find over 900 episodes. Or email me at cooper@coopertalk.net. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget to drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time.